I don't know if I should call myself a climate scientist. I've done work in climate risk, but my main focus is tropical cyclones and specifically hurricanes, model improvement, model evaluation related to that. But yeah, we lived in Superior, which was 3 miles east of where the fire started. And the fire started around 11:02 that morning. And within an hour and a half or so, our house was on fire and we were gone. So it was a very traumatic experience, a very amazing experience from a scientific perspective, because few, if any, people would have ever imagined that a fire would move so quickly from from the foothills out into the plains, into the urban, the wildland-urban interface. It just wasn't on people's radar screen. In fact, CSU had done a wildfire study back in 2013, and they highlighted that the grasslands west of our neighborhood, which you're seeing a picture of from our house, they had a moderate fire intensity rating assigned to those because the grasses were, sometimes 3 or 4 feet tall, and that can produce a 6 to 8 foot flame length. However, the actual neighborhood where we were at, they didn't show any fire risk. It's a suburban neighborhood. There's green lawns. You don't think of the neighborhood as the fuel itself, but that's what happened that day. The embers came into our neighborhood, and our neighborhood became an inferno.
And you obviously had to move out. Again, Superior, Colorado, lost several hundred homes that day, I believe. Also in other parts, some of the other municipalities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a total of 1,084 homes were destroyed, and probably several dozens of other houses were heavily damaged from smoke and whatnot. Superior lost, I think, on the order of 306 or 330. I'm not sure exactly what the number was. Louisville lost, I think, over 500, and unincorporated Boulder County also lost a number of houses.
Unthinkable, as you said. It was even unthinkable knowing working on climate risk,
mm-hmm.
risk being again, it must have just been surreal. I just feel for you and your household. And I did interview at the time several other folks from around there. One guy who lived in a newer neighborhood a little east of you,
mm-hmm.
where they had the fiber and cement siding. And for whatever reason, either meteorological or structural, their line of houses didn't burn down. And so you do have this sense, though, of building practices that are more fire safe than what has been there historically. And tell us now about what's happening in the community with this really pretty intense discussion about how to become a community again.
Yeah. First, I think you're alluding to the gentleman who lived on 2nd Avenue. And those were some new houses that had just been built in the past couple of years. And I don't know if they were built to the urban wildland interface code standard, but they had cementitious siding, as you mentioned. They probably were more airtight than the average house. And I just wanted to point out that row of houses survived, even though all the houses across the street from it to the west burnt down. That was the older part of the neighborhood. Right. We now understand, I believe, that fire intervention, the firefighters intervened, and that probably helped to save a lot of those houses. But it's also clear that having cementitious siding bought them some time, which allowed the firefighters to have a chance to save those houses. Whereas in my neighborhood, the houses were 10 feet apart. We had, this wood pulp type siding, which is just extremely flammable. And the fire basically got into the attics of many houses in the initial ember attack. And within the first 20 minutes, the firefighters reported 16 houses on fire, and they basically gave up at that point at around 12:30. And from there, it was a series of dominoes. The houses that were on fire caught the houses next to them on fire, and it just went down the line, all the way down the street and then up the other side, is what I heard from neighbors. So without any type of resilience, it was just a complete lost cause for the neighborhood. And we're just so grateful that this happened at noon on a work day, when people were actually there, a lot of people were working from home, they were paying attention, and at least the ones who were looking out the window saw that something was up and they were able to get out in time. But if this has happened at night, we shudder to think of what would have happened, because there could have been dozens of people killed. The neighborhood really was a death trap, the way it was structured, the way it was planned out, the spacing, it was terrible. So
and
yeah,
how has this
this conversation about resilience has gone very intense, because the town of Superior has considered a ordinance that would have upgraded our codes to require, which is in effect the International Urban Wildland Interface Code, or the IWUI. And when they had the public meeting for this, a bunch of neighbors showed up, and some spoke in favor of it. A few people spoke out against it, especially the old-time residents from original town. There was just a couple, 2 or 3 individuals who really didn't want this, and they made a very vocal argument that, we don't want this crammed down our throats. It's going to cost too much. One guy said it was going to cost $25,000 to implement these resilience measures. And we now know that the true cost is probably on the order of $3,000 to $5,000. The main things that we need are the ember-resistant soffits and fascia, which are along the roof line, the ventilation openings. And everything else about the production builds that are planned pretty much already meet the rest of the code. We have the cementitious siding, we have a Class A roof, the dual pane windows would meet the minimum IWUI standards. So it's basically the ember-resistant pieces that are missing.
Right.
And it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper to do that when the house is built than to do it after the fact as a retrofit. So it's pretty much now or never. If we don't get the neighborhood with some resilience now, there's a good chance a lot of houses won't ever have it.
Wow.
So yeah,
I'm showing an image. This is the Headwaters Economics report from 2018, which showed it really is. It's barely more expensive in many ways, and obviously, if you think about the risk reduction, it's almost a no-brainer. And now I understand the IBHS insurance entity has a new standard that Paradise, California has adopted for its areas that were destroyed. So how does it feel that this got turned down? And this, just to explain, I've written about flash flooding in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where after devastating 40-inch rain flooding, destroying houses, a year later, the community was actually relaxing their flood code. And it's this pull of the economic need, ahead of the sort of longer term thinking. And so it's a pattern. And as a reporter, it gets pretty exasperating to see this. But as someone who is directly in the middle of it, what does that feel like?
Yeah, I can understand the economic and cost arguments that people make. There is a tendency after a large-scale disaster to just push as hard as possible on making the rebuild as cheaply as possible, as fast as possible. And part of that's driven by the fact that people only have a limited amount of additional living expense coverage from their insurance companies. For my family, we only had 12 months, which our rebuild is likely to be completed, I think, after 24 months. So we might go a whole year without coverage. So, that's a really tricky thing. Anything that would delay that, people are going to be very much against. But on the other hand, with climate change, with all the different things that are happening with weather-driven risks, you have to think about resilience. I mean, the thing that keeps rattling through my mind is, do I really want to go through this again? Have most of my neighborhood burned down, potentially lose my house, have my whole life disrupted for another 2 years or more? I mean, no. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. This has been such a traumatic and really just a gut-wrenching experience for my family. And so, if I could spend $5,000 and have at least a fair chance of avoiding this in the future, it's worth it to me. So that's how I think about it.
And this also relates to the risks that the firefighter community faces too. Of if people are building flammability. I did a piece after one of the California fires where I started talking about indefensible space. There's this idea of space, meaning a 100-foot barrier around houses where you clear the brush and stuff. And there were all these images of what were clearly just indefensible, meaning ethically indefensible, as well as and then firefighters, their prime priority, of course, when there is a wildfire that gets into crosses the border into town, their job is really to protect structures. So you're kind of endangering firefighters as well. It's when there's federal money involved. I wrote about this in Colorado when around Colorado State University there was a terrible fire, and someone made a pretty good case that it was Headwaters Economics that makes the case that when it's the federal government that comes in, it's taking the burden of the cost away from the local community, so it's kind of a subsidy. And I wish there were a way for a normalization of that sense you're bringing to the problem. And I don't know, in talking with neighbors, have you found a way to talk about it that has tipped the balance even in a one-on-one discussion, or is there something about these dynamics that makes it really hard?
Yeah, we've had a lot of vigorous discussions in our neighborhood Slack channel. That's been one of the really interesting aspects of this. Before the fire, our community was, moderately close-knit. Some people knew each other, some people didn't. After the disaster, we started a Slack channel, and we've been much more in touch than ever before, discussing all sorts of these type of issues. And it's been tough. I've really been an advocate in the neighborhood for fire resilience. And initially, some people were worried that, it was going to cost too much. It might push them over the edge into not being able to rebuild. But the more and more that we've discussed this as a neighborhood, I feel like a lot of people have recognized that this is a need. It is a really critical need, and the costs are pretty moderate compared to all the other upgrades that they're considering or the other things that are going on with costs. So yeah, I think that we've come to a pretty good consensus in our neighborhood that this is something we want. We have 46 out of the 171 property owners who've signed a petition who agree that they would like this. And that's a majority of the people we've been able to contact. There's some people we haven't been able to contact since the fire, so we don't know what they're doing or what their plans are.
Well, that's certainly, let's hope that helps to propel the dynamic forward. It just must be, how does this take you toward thinking about not staying in that area, leaving? Especially as a climate focused.
Yeah.
We should do a whole nother session on hurricanes, and we're doing a lot on hurricanes, but you can bring your analytical skills to this problem too. And
I feel like I should lead by example. And if my neighborhood truly is indefensible, that really gives me great pause for investing so much in rebuilding, because what I'm facing is that we want to have maximum fire resistance for our rebuild. So we are looking at a wall system with a 4-hour rating. We're looking at all the different attributes of the house that we can do to try to make our house as fireproof as possible. And the experts always tell us there's no such thing as a fireproof house. Right. But our goal in our rebuild is to make our house as fireproof as it can be, considering that there's going to be a house on 10 feet on either side of it. But unfortunately, that drove us into the semi-custom category, or the custom category of houses, and that basically added $250,000 to our cost. So that's a big, heavy pill to swallow financially to achieve fire resilience. But that seems to be the cost of what it's going to take to stay in this area. I have been doing a little bit of research. I should preface this by saying I'm not a fire expert, but I follow fires very closely, and I'm learning a lot. And there's some research that shows that there's a chance, as the ocean circulation changes, that we could have more La Niñas. And that would be kind of contrary to what a lot of the climate models have shown up to this point. And I just want to say this is not, no one should jump up and say, researchers have proven we're going to have more La Ninas, because we don't know for sure. That's one study that was using pre-industrial conditions. But if it's true, if the La Ninas really do increase in frequency, like we've been seeing a trend towards in the last 20 years, that would really amp up the fire risk in Colorado. These type of wind-driven events would actually become quite a bit more likely, maybe twice as likely. And that's kind of terrifying, because we got enough bad windstorms before this. Every 5 years, we probably get 90 or so miles per hour. In this windstorm, I think we got at least 105 probably at my location. I had an inverter on the roof, and right before I ran out the door, it read 100 miles per hour. So we basically evacuated with a city hurricane. But
that's I just wrote about that triple header La Nina possibility just a week or two ago. So, and as you say, there's uncertainty. But to me, in having written about climate change since the 80s and about climate vulnerability, putting the vulnerability question in the foreground more and more in recent years, there's utter clarity at the neighborhood or community scale of things to do, no matter what's happening with the climate system, that can reduce your system's vulnerability. And whether it's heat waves or fire or flooding. And what you said something a minute ago that really struck me, which was that you have to have that design be a custom design. And I guess this goes back to the financial world and the world of insurance. And I would love to envision some process that leads to that no longer being custom, but being customary.
Yeah, well,
meaning in the norm.
The town of Superior, the really simple thing would be for the town board to pass this IWUI code. And once it's code, the production builders would have to offer it. And the problem we've been having in the neighborhood is the production builders don't want to do anything extra. They just want to build their product exactly like they're used to doing for as cheap as they can to get as much business as they can. Until the municipality is ready to step up and make a change, we're pretty much stuck there, because even if all the people in my neighborhood ask for this, it's unclear that the production builders would even do it. So the only way is to get it passed as code. And once you do that, I think the production builders would rise to the occasion. They would come up with a cost-effective solution, which is really, changing out a few soffit and fascia and ember vents, ember-resistant vents. It's not really rocket science, but that's where we're at. However, I do have an idea on the finance side. Most insurance policies do carry what's called code upgrades coverage. However, it is capped typically. It's usually about 10% of the value of the coverage A, which is the dwelling coverage. And what I would like to see is for insurance companies to, if there's any sustainability or resilience related measures, I would like the code upgrades coverage to be unlimited. In other words, it should be a required part of the policy, and it should be whatever it takes to get your house rebuilt in a resilient manner. Now, obviously, they would charge a little bit more in your premiums, but that's fair. I mean, if you pay a few dollars extra and your home gets destroyed and you get to rebuild a resilient house, that's a win-win for everyone, I think.
Well, I'll try to follow up on that and talk to some folks in the industry to see where that stands. The other thing that's tough about the on-the-ground issue, it's similar to vaccination. This came up in my conversation last year with someone on Wildfire. All it takes is one house to be sort of that ember-producing, unimproved place to add to the risk all around it. So it really is a community challenge too. Ultimately, does that feel right? It's not. You could build your perfectly armored house, but what you really want is what is it you really would, what does success look like to you? What would make you feel like, okay, this is where my family would be from here forward? And
yeah, that's a really good point. Wildfire resistance has to be a community level effort, because I can build my armored house, but if my whole neighborhood burns down around me, one house out of 171, that wouldn't be a great success story. first of all. Second of all, the embers would still go downstream and catch many, many other things on fire. And you know, it wouldn't even be very satisfying. My whole neighborhood would be gone all over again, and I probably wouldn't be able to even live in the house for 9 months while everything gets cleaned up like it did this time. You know, it took the cleanup. We finally have finished the cleanup after 176 days or so. And, you know, the neighborhood is just bare plots right now, basically ready to be built, but nothing happening. So it is a real challenge. I know we have this culture of freedom, individual freedom, but we also have individual responsibility in this country that we have to consider our neighbors and not make our houses like Roman candles.
Absolutely.
So I think that's why, you know, we've asked the town to go ahead and pass this IWUE code and allow an individual opt-out for those few people who don't really want it. But the other thing is we would like that opt-out only to be in effect if, you know, the people opting out are at least 20 feet away from other structures.
Mm-hmm.
That way their choices will only negatively impact people through embers, not through the direct heat. Now the science would say it's really 30 to 50 feet, but, you know, we have to compromise a little bit.
For sure.
But what that would do is basically require IWUE in Sagamore neighborhood, but in original town where the houses are further apart, it would give people the freedom to opt out if they wanted to.
Well, so let's hope. Well, I'd love to keep track of this as this goes forward, and hopefully the community will have that kind of common sense approach that you're describing. So thanks for having this conversation with me, and good luck to you and your family and your neighbors. And this is hardly restricted to Superior or Boulder County. You know, all along the Front Range, there are so many parts of the country where there's built vulnerability. Hopefully these lessons are also being shared as widely as possible in the conversations. One thing I try to do with these posts I do is spread the gospel. Make sure no one's just talking in a little cubby hole over here with information that could be useful over there. So thanks again, Jonathan Vigh.
Yep, thank you so much, Andy. And I hope that, I guess there's another takeaway that we didn't talk about, but the underinsurance problem really is a massive, massive issue. And I hope, I tell everyone that I get the chance to check their insurance policy, and very likely you're underinsured. So that's something that just wanted to highlight, because when people are underinsured, it just makes all these resilience problems that much harder. And most of us didn't even, I mean, I don't think anyone had an inkling that they were underinsured in our neighborhood.
Oh boy. And then there it is right in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. I think that does it. Let me just end the recording.